At around 8 a.m. of September 22, 1987, the staff of a commuter train traveling from the town of Moss to Oslo in Norway had received notice to drive with extra care when approaching the small village of Kambo, as there was a strange object on the rail tracks near the village. The train stopped at the side of the object that initially appeared to be a garbage bag. The drivers got off the train to investigate, where they realized they were looking at the body of a man lying on his stomach on the left side of the tracks. His right arm and foot were separated from his body, and he appeared to have been hit by a train. The discovery did not initially strike authorities as unusual, but the area he was found in was remote and relatively inaccessible, where on the one side of the train tracks was the sea and on the other there were mountains. The only plausible way to get there would be on foot, where one would have to walk on or too near the rail tracks. A closer examination of the body and the man's clothing shifted the whole focus of the investigation. The body was estimated to belong to a man of age between 55 and 65, and the autopsy confirmed that his injuries were consistent with ones caused upon train impact that possibly also severed his hand and foot. He was found to be of relatively good health prior to his death. He had 2 older scars from a hernia surgery, and no alcohol or any other substances were detected in his system. The clothes he was wearing were a grey jacket, a yellow sweatshirt, a white shirt, blue jeans, a black belt, brown shoes, a handkerchief, and medical support socks, often worn to treat symptoms of blood clots, although no such condition was ever identified on his body. The only items found in his pockets were a Swiss Army knife and an almost empty packet of cigarettes. But here are the strange facts. No form of identification was ever found on him or around the area where he died, and with the exception of his underpants, all of his clothing had the tags cut off. Inside his underpants, rather than a typical clothing tag, there was a label marked with the number 1 that was written in German, something also unusual. His upper teeth line revealed that he was wearing dentures, although no dentures were ever recovered. These could have been misplaced when the train hit him, and they were simply never located during the search. Or there is a possibility that these had been deliberately taken off prior to his death, in an attempt to hide his identification, either by his own volition or by someone else. The kamboman soon made headlines across the country with a photo of his body and clothing items placed on the front pages, but sadly no one ever came forward to claim him. The few tips authorities obtained, including a train driver who saw a man around that area those days fitting the deceased description, all led to a dead end. 2 months after his body was discovered, the Norwegian authorities sent out a black notice to Interpol, which essentially provides information for unidentified bodies and includes physical description, fingerprints and photos to check against any missing persons reports from around the world and try to give a name back to him. But no further leads were collected, and Interpol removed the case from their system few years after, only to re-enter it 30 years later when the case was officially reopened, as we shall soon see. In 2017, Norwegian journalists picked up the story in their efforts to feature it in one of the local unsolved mysteries shows and spread more awareness about the case. Their investigation eventually forced the authorities to revive the case. That is when they realized that many of the clothes were misplaced or thrown away, and the remaining were thoroughly washed in 1987, eliminating any chances to obtain genetic material from the clothing. DNA profiling was not performed in the 80s, and thus authorities never considered containing the bloody clothes. The underpants kamboman was wearing at the time of his death were made from a brand called Ilan Body. The investigation led them to trace this bag through eBay and found that these were manufactured in Frankfurt and sold in German warehouses, where these were most likely purchased from. The clothes were examined by a German specialist with expertise in analysis of clothing textile and origination. The specialist was certain that the jacket was the so-called Szymanski jacket. Szymanski was the main character of a German detective TV series who wore the jacket, which then became very popular among German middle-aged men in the 1980s. The specialist also determined that the clothes were of cheap quality and most probably purchased from German warehouses. Nothing further stood out from the clothing until they started to examine the shoes. The pair of shoes seemed to originate from France. These were quite expensive shoes and specially made for long-distance walking or for anyone with orthopedic issues. Inside the left shoe, they uncovered a small piece of handwritten paper that was taped on the sole with the number 15250, a clue that was initially overlooked in 1987. The examiner was certain that the first number resembled an inverted V, which suggested to her that it was written by someone who usually writes in German. They still haven't managed to decipher the meaning of the number. Authorities also spoke to the manufacturer of the shoes, where they determined that the particular model came from a faulty batch, and the factory itself provided a traceable number on all of those shoes to link back to a customer list. Unfortunately, that list was long gone, and it is not yet conclusive if the number on the shoe corresponded to this or it indicated something else altogether. Was this a special number kamboman needed to remember or have with him at all times? Was it a number no one else was supposed to know about? Research was also conducted on the quality of the smokes they found in his pocket, since there was no indication on the packet as to which country these came from. Based on the lower quality of the tobacco, they determined this to be made in the West Europe and sold in the Eastern European market. The only genetic material they managed to obtain was from the packet of cigarettes, which still had traces of blood on it. The Y chromosome profile was run against the international DNA database YRHD that contained hundreds of thousands of male wild profiles from all over the world to search for any common patterns that could reveal country origins. The countries with high hit scores were Estonia and Switzerland, but even higher scores revealed Germany and surprisingly Colombia. Colombia had the most Y profiles registered on the database, and thus scientists attributed the high scores to that fact, or to the fact that a large German community existed in Colombia, where many migrated back to Germany during the early stages of the Civil War. A search through the missing persons databases from such countries revealed one case that attracted particular attention. A man from Switzerland in his 50s, who went missing on Christmas Eve in 1977, had remarkable physical resemblance with Kamboman when they compared their photos. They were initially hopeful, but after running DNA comparison with the missing man's brother, they found no match. Much of the evidence suggested that Kamboman was German, or at least had links to Germany. But why was he in Norway, and why was he on a remote location near the train tracks that day he died? The quality of the clothes, with the exception of shoes, were determined to be of cheap quality. Donated clothes sometimes have the tags cut off, and so the theory that Kamboman was a homeless person was suggested. Linking this back to the train driver who saw a man fitting Kamboman's description around the train tracks, they further theorized that perhaps this person was homeless and was trying to illegally board the train, but sadly met an unfortunate death. When the first episode of the Norwegian Unsolved Mysteries show aired, a number of tips were obtained, but one received from a former truck driver intrigued authorities the most. The driver, who resided in Kambo, often had to drive around Europe back in the 80s as part of his duties transferring goods. When he heard about the case, he remembered that towards the end of September of 1987, he was driving to Italy to pick up goods to deliver it back to Norway and made a foot stop in Germany. When he finished and returned to his truck, he noticed a hole in the tarp on top of the goods that resembled a cut from a knife. He didn't think much of it, But when he returned back to Norway and parked the truck outside his house, he heard a weird noise from inside the truck, akin to the sound of a cargo falling over. The next day he observed an even bigger hole in the tarp, large enough to fit a man through. He never reported the incident as nothing was stolen from his truck, but after watching the show he was certain that someone jumped into the truck in his efforts to cross the borders. Could this be Kamboman? Did he enter the country and then started walking towards Moss town through the rail tracks but was tragically killed? One of the first theories investigators put forth was that the man was a sailor on board a ship to Norway. In 1987, investigators checked against port authorities' records, and according to the logbooks, a German cargo ship arrived at Moss Harbor on September 10th and departed just 2 hours after the man was found dead on the tracks, but no further leads in connection to this were ever established. One of the theories most believe possible is that the man was an intelligence agent on a secret mission. It is a common procedure for agents to take extreme measures to hide their identity, and one of the steps they take is to cut the clothes tag off so no one would be able to trace his or her origins. The main reason for this theory was that in the 1980s, along the rail tracks and close to where the body was found, there was a tunnel that led to a NATO base, with a radar station located there that was part of the so-called Nike system, which was a missile defense system aiming to protect Oslo from potential missile attacks. The area also had past incidences with spies who were eventually apprehended. If we consider that his clothes labels were missing and he was wearing shoes designed for long distances, as well as the mysterious number found taped in his left shoe, and the area his body was discovered, perhaps this clue aligned with the intelligence agent theory. This case has certain odd similarities to the Jennifer Fairgate case, a woman found dead in a hotel in Oslo, and the Isdalwoman, another unidentified woman also found dead in Norway in 1970, and once again no one came forward to claim them. The Kamboman's remains are still buried in a cemetery in Moss, still without a name or a story attached to him. Until next time.